This conversation is part of an interview project through the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. We're speaking with Yale alumni in order to more deeply understand the hearts and minds of those who work at the intersection of spiritual leadership and environmental action. Today, we are grateful to be joined by Katharine Preston. Katharine is an ecumenical lay preacher and writer concentrating on issues of the climate crisis, social justice, and the relationship of humans to the non-human world. She and her husband live on a farm in Essex, New York, and are active associates of the Iona community. Katharine writes at katharinepreston.com. I'd love for you to tell a little bit about how your interest kind of in these questions around the human relationship to the more than human world, both as sort of scientific questions and as spiritual questions, and together, how that took shape for you.
Okay. I mean, I think I was thinking about my growing up. I'm the daughter of a physicist and an activist, and I don't think I really thought about it as science, and the activist was very faith-based. I mean, my mother was very, very involved with her church. I didn't think about those as being in conflict. I really have never, ever thought about this being in conflict. I did decide, because I had a lot of wonderful background from my father being in conservation and things like that, to get a scientific degree. So I went to the school of what was then the School of Forestry, and I got an environmental studies degree. That was after college. I mean, basically I had 1 year and I did that. And so, the concept of ecology and how that is so sort of bringing so many things together, whether it's the non-human, it's more the non-human world, and well, at that time it was, for me, it was more the non-human world, and then both the living and non-living world. And I worked in, because I was very committed to the earth. I worked in that for 20 or more years, and then I'm not sure really what happened, except that if all of a sudden it made sense for me to go to seminary. And I was sort of in between. I was after some work things that I had done. And so I decided to go to seminary. And so there I am. And that was, more than anything else, just an intriguing kind of thing. The opportunity to sit down and to read and to learn and stuff like that was important to me. So, and I started doing that. And I realized that the juxtaposition of my science background and the theology that I was studying was not brought together as much as I would like. So I ended up being involved in ecological things at Andover Newton Theological School, and I started the ecology ministry there. And there was the Boston Theological Institute had at that time was trying to enumerate different courses that people could take in science/theology. We're talking about 1998 or so now. And so one of the things I did was I accumulated a list of those courses. And then I met Mary Evelyn and John they were at Harvard for the forum there, and I was involved with the first forum they had, which was on ecology and Christianity. And I put together a service for the Sunday morning and of that conference, and that was really important to me. I have to say, really important to me, because, as I said, a lot of the people there were my bookshelf. In other words, the people that I had books on, they attended that, and that was like just blew my mind. And all during this time, I'm trying to figure out where is the juxtaposition. But there was no. I ended up getting, when I graduated from Andover Newton in 2000, I got some sort of a institute from the Boston Theological Institute in Christianity and ecology. That was all that was there. Nobody else was. There were a couple of other places that were doing things, but that was basically it. So, I think then more than anything else, the climate crisis started me down the road of thinking more about the justice parts. So it was really, I would say, probably less the science per se. When I say the science, I mean sort of the ecology and all that kind of thing, than it was the justice, which of course brought the faith things into it because of my feelings about people of faith being involved with justice. So that became more of a sort of an area that I've explored. And then I ended up writing this book about faith and science, and that more than anything else, frankly, I wrote it so I could put my thoughts together. It really helps to write, to put your thoughts together. What else can I say? I think there are two things that something happened. One thing that happened when I was at Andover and Newton that I think was very, very important was in my systematic theology course, discovering process theology. And John Cobb was then the preeminent process theologian. He came to that service that I helped do, and he said he liked it, which was like I was a groupie. Process theology is, I'm not going to take time to describe what it is here. People can look it up. But what it did for me is it made it very, very easy for me to have the science strongly in my brain and the faith. It was just absolutely made it so much easier. The concept that God would be something that was changing all the time, that everything is changing all the time. And that God takes what is past into the present and creates the future with everybody else, everything else, the rocks, the mountains, the grass, everything else. That just made huge scientific sense to me, if you will. I mean, yes, there's a prime mover in my case, feeling like there was a deity involved, but I can't explain how really, really important that was for me.
Yeah.
And then over time, that has also, I spoke about the justice aspects of it. That's important. But more recently, I would say that I've been dealing with both in my writing and so forth with the concept of human exceptionalism and how that is so getting in the way of us having a relationship with the other than human world in the sense that perhaps indigenous people would have. And I've been working more recently on the Thanksgiving address of the Haudenosaunee and how that epitomizes for me a relationship which frankly goes directly against a lot of scripture.
Interesting.
And so, I haven't delved into, pointing that out specifically because that's not as much of interest to me. But I think I think it's important for people who have faith and base their faith at all on scripture, that there are scriptural parts that are not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, can I ask, right, I'd love to hear, I mean, you could go towards specific examols of that or not.
Well, I mean,
just...
Genesis starts it off pretty badly. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's, proliferate and dominate and all that kind of thing. But I mean, it's just, all of that kind of thing. I mean, there's nowhere really in the Bible. That's not entirely true. My favorite book of the Bible is Job. And that's because in the, in Job 38, when God says, "Excuse me, what are you asking me?" I just love that. I love the concept that Job is just one little tiny iota of a pixel and we don't have any concept of the whole. That's in God's realm. And so there are parts of scripture which I found helpful. I mean, there are other ones too, but I mean, I would say predominantly both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are full of a lot of human exceptionalism. What can we say?
Right. And how do you think we need to like, what do we do with that? Like, how would you think about um, encountering those parts of the tradition, reclaiming, discarding, reinventing? What kinds of
I
tools
guess,
do you use in sort of,
okay, I'm not a textual, scriptural kind of person. And that's, I mean, I think that can be done. And a lot of people are doing wonderful things about that and finding out, well, does this word really mean that? Or does it mean this? And does that make a difference or whatever? And there are people doing that. I just don't take time with that personally. I think for me, I feel I'm blessed with a very strong feeling of faith in God and a strong feeling of God as creator. And therefore, I don't sort of feel the need to go back to the scripture and work it out. I'd rather, for me, spend time in the here and now saying, in terms of justice, it's pretty simple for me because it's an admonition that actually is out of the Hebrew Testament with Micah, you know, um, to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God.
Mhm.
And that's what rules my life.
Mm,
And it seems to me that if people want to take apart, if academics want to take apart the text and things like that, that's great. It's just not what I do.
mhm. Yeah, yeah.
I'd rather just try to live it, if you
Hmm.
know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I really appreciate just bringing us to that place of like there are the scriptural textual parts of religious tradition, and there's so much more that spiritual and faith-based life can kind of connect us to, or
Yeah, and
and
I think,
yeah.
okay, I mean, another not unrelated thing is I think there's been a lot of talk. I think it's actually been more in the Christian tradition than it has in the Hebrew connection, the Jewish tradition of care for creation. And I have sort of a problem with care for creation because to me it sounds patronizing in a way. I really don't like the word steward. That's used and has been used traditionally a lot, and I guess maybe it brings some people into a relationship that makes sense, but I really don't like it because a steward to me is somebody that is responsible, is put there by somebody else, God,
Mm,
to care for something. And it's not that we're not supposed to care. It's just that we're supposed to love. We are supposed to be in relationship to,
mhm, mhm,
and that should let us, that should help us to do the right thing. But caring for creation sounds, as I said, patronizing to me.
uh-huh.
And it also has a bit of a it sort of in a funny way puts God out of the picture.
Mm,
I'm not sure why, at least it does for me.
uh-huh.
So I don't like, as I said, stewardship is a big problem for me. I mean, it's
Mhm.
back to the question about human exceptionalism.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think that humans are so exceptional that they should be caring for creation. They should just be the part that they are.
Mm,
They should
mm,
be doing it right. And there
mm,
is a right and a wrong. And
mm, mm. Wow.
that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Um, so I'm interested with all what you're saying in kind of as someone who spent many years in kind of working in the nonprofit and public sector around land management,
Mhm.
and then sort of came to doing this work now in a more explicitly sort of religious, spiritual context and perspective. Um, Maybe yeah, that feels right. I'm curious, kind of like both to hear a little bit about what brought you to doing it in this context and exploring these questions in this context now, and a little bit about the differences between those experiences, and um, what it's felt like, or yeah, kind of the
Yeah.
underpinnings of working in those contexts around these questions.
And it's a really good question because I don't really know the answer to your question. I don't know what, I mean, I don't think a light bulb went off. I think going to seminary was, I mean, I never forget, I mean, Andover Newton in those days had a little brochure and it says, "Is God keeping you awake at night?" And I said, "Damn, yeah." So, so, so that's sort of, so I started into seminary, and then I noticed that in seminary, nobody was talking about the earth. No, nobody was talking about those things that were really, really important to me. And so that's when I started struggling to get, putting together the ecology ministry and stuff like that. So so I guess what I'm trying to say is I didn't go to seminary for the reason, to make my work in this better. I mean, that wasn't conscious of my point, is what I'm trying to say. Okay.
Right.
I think what's really hard now, and I think this is what you're really asking me, is when you are in the context with scientists or when you're in the context with people of faith, how do they take you, for instance? Okay. And my experience has been that the people of faith have an easier time accepting and understanding and struggling, whatever, with the science than the scientists do with the faith.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I know Mary Evelyn and I have talked about this a lot, and I think she's seen the same thing. I mean, so when I've been involved with the forum and have been at Yale and talking to people back and forth, and the divinity students don't have any problem. They accept the science. I mean, understand that the people that are involved with something like this are not deists to the point of, God controls everything. It's not, I mean, it's yeah, okay. I guess
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is there's a fairly progressive group,
Mm-hmm.
theologically progressive group of people that are dealing with these questions, okay? And they have no problem with the science at all. I mean, the science is a science. And God is involved there, at least that's the way I feel about it, okay? The scientists often are, I'm not going to use the word frightened, but crossing that threshold into faith is harder for them because there has been such I think, a pushback over centuries probably, that there's been some sort of a conflict, and so they don't dare. I probably am making very broad generalizations, but I would say that I think you asked me about sort of working in one or the other, and I would just say that I think there's a difference. I think it's an easier time for the people of faith to walk over the bridge, so to speak, than it is for some of the scientists, not all of them, but some of them.
Hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
whether other people have found that, but that's my experience, I would say.
Yeah, that's really
But
interesting.
I love, I have a quote in my book from Teilhard de Chardin that I love, and that
Hmm.
is, less and less do I feel a difference between research and adoration.
Hmm.
I just
Hmm.
kind of says it all to me. Kind of says it all to me, you know.
Wait, so can you draw out one sentence of what
Well,
it?
just because I think I imagine Teilhard de Chardin, doing his research and being moved
Hmm.
by the Spirit of God,
Hmm.
seeing what he's seeing. And I love that. And that's
Yeah.
certainly what I mean, when I go out, just came back from a walk, and the hepatica, which is a very early flower that's flowering here, and that comes up
Yeah.
right there, comes up again, and
Hmm.
is I know the leaves are there over the winter, which means that it gets a jump on the springtime because it's doing getting its chlorophyll together and stuff like that much earlier than most things. I look at it,
Yeah.
blows my mind,
Yeah.
blows my mind.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, adoration, and that would be to me adoration of the complexity of the universe and of creation. And you know, the thing that doesn't express as much is the thing that I'm kind of not struggling with, but working on now, is this business about what does it mean to be so much a part. I don't actually use the word nature anymore, because I find that is, again, it puts humans off to the side. But I can use the word, at least in this context here, creation, big C, small c, whatever you want. But being a part of that, and the Haudenosaunee people, who are people that are near where I live, have the Thanksgiving address where they, every single morning, the school children, and before any event or whatever, they go through this address to all things and Thanksgiving. It's acknowledgement and thanksgiving, and humans are just one part, just one part. This is not, untypical of any indigenous cultural way of looking at things. I'm just trying to understand how that feels, what that means for me, and how is it that I can express that as something that I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard, Tali, I would say right now, because the world is a mess, and I'm talking about a relationship, a very sacred relationship, a very, that I think is incredibly important. And I'd like to think that at some point, it won't be in my lifetime, but at some point people will get back to that kind of thought. But talking about that when the horrors are happening in the world is hard. I find it hard. I always feel like I need to be out there marching, which I did yesterday. For the record, this is being taped one day after there were a lot of protests, and I was out there. Can you do both?
Yeah.
I think you have to do both. You have to do both, but it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to ask a little bit about that, doing both. And I know that, right, that you've been influenced in your activism by both your parents, but
Yes.
your mother as an activist.
Yeah.
And what kind of do you see as the role, the role of activism, political activism, movement building in the climate crisis and in the environmental movement? And
Well, I mean, now it's practically anything you turn to has and the environment being one part, but then there's a part of me that says, well, the environment's all parts, So I mean, but the way everything is sort of categorized now, this is what Trump is doing against these people, and this is what Trump is doing against the earth, and this, to me, it's all sort of the same kind of thing. I mean, I can't not be active in that. I can't, and I think it's in my genes. I really do think it's in my genes. I mean, very, very early age, my mother was out with me in hand, in tow, going to civil rights marches. And then during the Vietnam War, I was out there, a leader by my university and stuff like that. So that's something I do, and I think I mean, personally, I have to do that. A lot of people don't have to do that. A lot of people do things in different ways. They don't have to be necessarily out on the streets. And one of the other things that I do is I write, and I write letters to the editor, and I write position statements for my church, and I dabble around with books and in blogs and stuff like that, and that does two things for me. One thing, it helps me in my mind, because when I write, it helps me figure out things. And then second of all, it kind of gets it out there. And because I think the most satisfying thing to any writer is when somebody comes to you and says, "Oh God, I'm so glad you said it that way, because it's the way I feel."
Yeah.
So I think, anyway, I'm not in academia, and that's quite intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I want to ask about writing in a second, but also just finishing the question about kind of activism and I mean, not that they're separate necessarily, but
Yeah, yeah.
that um, yeah, just how do you see the, I guess, the possibility for and the need for faith leaders, people of faith, faith-based organizations,
Well, yeah.
and scientists kind of coming together, or what are each of their
Well,
roles kind of in them?
I mean, the problem is that, although I think we have had faith leaders coming together ecumenically and interdenominationally, interfaith and so forth, scientists have been, quiet because it's not something they usually do. But I mean, we have seen in the last 10 years or so, scientists becoming much more vocal and getting out there and saying what they, particularly about climate science. I mean,
Yeah.
hello. And so now we have, I don't know what else to say, but a common enemy. And it seems to me that I don't really, I'll take that back because I don't use the word enemy anymore. I'm a part of something called Braver Angels, and we don't do that. We don't use those. Strike that part. There's a common cause.
Mm-hmm.
There's a common cause, and science has to be supported, and faith people have to be out there. Every major, nonviolent movement has been headed by people of faith, whether it's Gandhi with his faith or Martin Luther King. I mean, we got to be out there.
Mm-hmm.
And now we got to particularly be out there because I would say that it's the progressive churches that have to be out there because, from my perspective, Christianity has been taken over, and at least in the wider press, and by people who do not share my theology at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get to the point where I am reticent about saying that I'm a Christian, then something's very wrong, because I do consider myself a Christian in the sense that I follow the teachings of this man, Jesus. But I do not think like the Christian nationalists think.
Right.
I don't. And so I just think it's really important that churches, I'll have to say progressive churches, are out there saying, you know, whether it be for nonviolence or for taking care of immigrants and the poor, and I mean everything,
Yeah.
I mean, I just, I'm not sure that any of us can just sit back and do nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
Maybe
yeah,
I'm a little.
so that right, so being out in the streets, obviously, really important
For
way
me, I
of
mean, it's
doing.
not, again, it's not for
Yeah,
everybody, but I mean, there
yeah,
are other ways of doing it. But yeah, I
right.
need to do that. I need to do that.
And then you've also mentioned writing. And I know that you also identify as a lay preacher. And I'm curious to um yeah, ask about those modes, right? So
Mhm,
writing, you've talked about a little bit, lay preaching
mhm.
and preaching.
Yeah, I don't get
Kind of,
that. I don't get as many opportunities as I used to preach, but as it turns out, I've got 3 preaching dates in the next 3 months. So
mhm. Yeah,
that's coming out again. And yeah, I mean, I like preaching. I think I'm pretty good at it. It I really enjoy taking a I usually use the lectionary because I love the challenge of taking whatever the lectionary reading is for that day and finding an environmental theme in it, which I
mm,
always can do.
cool.
It's just neat.
Yeah,
I
well,
always can do. I
that's
mean,
wonderful.
there's always something.
Mm,
And so I enjoy that. I enjoy the challenge of that a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Is there a potent recent example that you could share with us of like a kind of the puzzle of finding an ecological theme in the lectionary that you
I
enjoyed
can't
or
think of one right now, but I
okay,
mean,
yeah.
I mean, I just, I mean, if I don't use the lectionary reading, and I haven't, I'm not, I don't even know what the lectionary readings are I'm trying to think of what it is for today, but and I'd have to think about it. I can't not write smack on the board. But I
Hmm.
mean, I would use Job because I like it that much. But I mean, there's so many, the Psalms, I mean, they're incredible. The Psalms are so amazing with with images and things like that. I mean, there's plenty.
Yeah.
There's plenty. I mean, I suppose there probably are some that I would struggle with, but the wonderful thing about at least our lectionary is that usually have four different things to pick from. So you've got, a Hebrew Bible thing, a epistle, a psalm, and a thing from the gospel. And between four, you ought to be able to find something pretty easily.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that, and I don't shy away from that.
Mhm.
Even because I mean, often when I'm guest preaching or subbing or something like that, people are used to having preaching from the lectionary.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Great.
anyway,
So yeah, we just got a couple minutes kind of
okay.
left here. So I'm curious, one, if there's anything that we kind of didn't go towards that you want to, this would be a great time to do that. And also, maybe I'll just put this out there for you to go any which way with, but just sort of looking ahead, and speaking maybe potentially specifically to students or people who are interested in finding their way, their voice
Yeah.
in making a difference in this
Well, I
in
think
these
that's
questions at
probably,
this.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the dual degree at Yale. I mean, it's so ironic. Okay. So here I have the degree from Yale a long time ago. I have the degree from Andover and Newton pretty long time ago. And now they're both in the same sort of area. I mean, they're above each other on a hill. Okay. And so the dual degree, I think, is phenomenal because I think it gives people an opportunity to do what I had to struggle to do.
Mm,
I had to struggle to have the opportunity in every single course I took in seminary. I spun in an environmental manner. It was not
mm,
hard to do. It was not hard to do at all.
mm,
Um, but what's wonderful now about what's happening at Yale, and Yale is not the only place. There are a number of dual degree programs of one sort or another across the country. And so these people find them and they have the liberty to explore that juxtaposition that they have in their mind, which, there is no conflict, okay, between the science and their faith. And they have an opportunity to learn more about that and learn a little bit about the history of that and the scriptural stuff that they, all that kind of thing. So the most important thing is to have those programs there for people that want to go on and study that and write books about that.
yeah.
I mean, there was a time when I really can make this statement. There was a time when I had every book that had religion and some sort of environmental theme. Okay.
Mm,
And, we're talking about a bookshelf this big. I've
yeah.
got, 3 bookshelves here.
Yeah.
We're in a whole different realm.
Mm,
So people are writing about it, and some of them some of them are faith-based, some of them are science-based, and then I have my shelf of what do I usually call them? The people that don't necessarily identify one way or another, like someone like Wendell Berry or Leopold or those people that there's a huge amount of the magnificence of creator in that. And Wendell Berry's most recent book of poems, he's much more explicit about it, which is very interesting. People should look it out.
Hmm.
He's willing
Okay.
to talk about his faith. So I think the point is people need to find the students need to find those opportunities to study and find people to mentor them.